All right, now we are up to Emily Dickinson's yeah, 712, number 712, otherwise known as Because I Could Not Stop for Death. And I'll read it and then I'll go over everything. Uh, uh, let's see. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. We slowly drove, he knew no haste, and I had put away my labour and my leisure too for his civility. We passed the school where children strove at recess in the ring. We passed the fields of gazing grain. We passed the setting sun. Or rather, he passed us. The dew drew quivering and chill. For only gossamer my gown might tip it only till. We paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. Since then 'tis centuries, and yet feels shorter than the day. I first surmised the horses' heads were towards eternity. All right. So that is the famous Because I Could Not Stop for Death. Certainly one of Dickinson's most well-known poems. And, always sort of a popular one with my students, it seems. It's kind of neat and well contained. It's I mean, because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves in immortality. I mean, very much like I don't like them. I don't like green eggs and ham. I don't like them Sam I am. Right, the same sort of nursery rhymish. Sort of rhythm, right? And again, mostly associated with children's nursery tales and things like that. But again, this is about a woman dying, and I think it's Dickinson's obviously doing something there with fastening the ultimate sort of dark subject to the ultimate sort of light, playful, banterish rhythm, right? And Dickinson does not seem to be all that intimidated, by death. She writes about death a lot, and often she's being, she certainly doesn't seem to be all that afraid or intimidated by it. She doesn't tend to write about it in morbid ways. And again, she was writing this in the 19th century, right, where death would have been just much more part of the everyday life of the average American than it certainly is today. There would not have been funeral homes and morticians and this entire apparatus we have now, right? Where mom or dad, heart seizes up, dies, and out they go in the ambulance, out they go with out the door feet first, then to the ambulance, and then at the hospital if they're not revived, they're then put downstairs into the morgue, where the undertaker will then pick them up out of back door where no one's ever going to see them, and they will be shuffled off to there, and then they will be embalmed, right? They usually go in the aortic valve there and out. I actually knew some funeral directors once upon a time. If you're wondering how I know about all this, but it's all very sort of sanitized and antiseptic, and the odors and smells and sounds and sights of death are really kind of kept very much tucked away and hidden from view in our world, and in a way it wasn't for Dickinson's times. And again, who do you think was dealing with most of the people that were dying? First of all, it would be a kind of communal affair. The neighbors helped each other with this sort of thing, and you had a relative who was dying. It could be very painful for them and the people around them. I mean, listen, if you had a long lost relative or something, right, who was coming, and this is before there's hotels and things like your Airbnbs all over the place, and so it might be someone you don't even know all that well, and you're responsible for them once they were in your house, and so whoever it was that was dying, and even if it was someone who was close, again, we didn't have all the sort of the sort of anesthetizing, medicines and chemicals, we can kind of alleviate people and sort of put them into a bit of a dream state now until their heart finally stops. This would be played out in real time and often pain, and people lose their minds, at the end. It can be an ugly thing. They get paranoid. Not uncommon, for someone who's been very sort of timid and sweet-natured all their whole life to suddenly start, suspecting their children are trying to poison them or biting their nurses and things like that. So, again, if you're a woman back in that, and again, it would have been all the other women who would have been helping each other, mostly anyway. Through these sorts of things, so death again is something on the mattress would have gone out the window later, and it just was something that was very real in a way it isn't now. But again, Dickinson doesn't see, she isn't really choosing to deal with the most, the harshest physical, corporeal parts of dealing with it. She kind of presents it, and she presents death itself, right? Which I guess you can almost visualize as like the Grim Reaper, right? And he pulls up, in a carriage, right? Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves in immortality. It is like death as the gentleman called her, right? This is very genteel and dignified. This was the opposite of what most people would have seen of death in this day. And again, just kind of comes on by like a gentleman caller. This is a woman who died, without ever marrying. And she gets in, and again, gets into the carriage, and as is common with Dickinson, she takes the abstract and concretizes it. Who's in that carriage? Just themselves and immortality, right? Just everything. And then she will then take a ride, right? And this ride is going to end, at the graveyard, and we're going to learn in the very last line that she's actually been telling us this. The speaker of this poem has been speaking to us from beyond the grave for quite a while, which is quite an imaginative feat. But we'll get there in a bit. The second stanza here, we slowly drove, he knew no haste, and I had put away my labor and my leisure too for his civility, and again in that first stanza, I could not stop for death, and by the way, that's kind of how it comes for most people, right? Law and Order and those sort of some of those episodic television shows show this well, where it's just somebody sort of living out a day of their life or an evening of their life, and all of a sudden, they kind of hear footsteps or something, and then they barely know something's wrong, and then boom, you go to the commercial, and then you come back, and the detective's having a cup of coffee or something and looking over the person's dead body, right? So death kind of comes for us all at some point, and I don't think we're almost never expecting it when it does. But again, he slowly drove, we knew no haste. And again, this is her gonna, the proverbial, going to her life flashing before her eyes, right? But she puts away, now she just kind of puts away her labor and her leisure too for his civility. So it's almost like that last, right, that last breath. When the person sort of gives up their life. And now we're going to move on to the third stanza. We passed the school where children strove at recess in the ring. We passed the fields of gazing grain. We passed the setting sun. And again, now you're going through childhood, right? And you see the children in the ring, the gazing grain, but then you get the setting sun, right? As she's continuing to move along. And then she, again, past the setting sun, and then she switches that in the next stanza, or rather, he passed us. And again, logic is, physical life is over, and the logic that went with it is sort of over, and she's, entering a sort of a immaterial, afterlife, I guess, as she's imagining it. And so, logic no longer, maybe she passed the sun, maybe the sun passed her, actually. So rather he passed us. The dews drew quivering and chill, and she seems to be now sort of realizing that something serious is happening. For only gossamer my gown, my tippet only till, that's just the material of her little nightie there as she's sitting there. Um, and then, the penultimate stanza here. We paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice and the ground. And again, that's the sort of roof. Like, if you ever seen mausoleums in a graveyard, this is sort of what they look like, right? They are sort of um, marble models of, they look like sort of short houses with the pitched roofs, and it's usually about half, it seems like half scale. If you've ever, if not, the next time you're in a graveyard, look at one, and that is sort of what they look. And of course they have the columns and everything outside it. But again, it seems scarcely visible above the ground. And she's in the carriage still. It seems to be dawning on her what's going on here, but she's not 100% sure, it seems. She's still not quite sure she's dead. And again, it kind of comes up over it, and then she sort of sees this thing, and then it's still, and again, she's just coming. It's like this entire poem is like a slow realization of her actual death, all of which, again, seems rather. Bombing and peaceful, not frightening really at all, but also there's a sort of numbness, and she's just sort of kind of rubbing her eyes open, like, right, and sort of realizing everything. But again, it's a swelling of the ground. And it is kind of, if you've ever been in graveyards, tend to be a bit hilly. And, and again, the mausoleums seem, in my experience anyway, to be in corners and toward the back, and you do kind of get to them that way. And anyway, she has been on this long carriage ride now, where she's past the recess, the children at recess and the gazing grain in the setting sun, and then she kind of comes over, right, we're at the end of this long journey, right, where it comes over the hill, sees which is going to be the mausoleum, which is going to be her resting place, right. And then we do get that sort of surprise, at the end of it, the last stanza. Since then 'tis centuries, and yet feels shorter than the day that I first surmised the horse's head were towards eternity. So again, she's been dead hundreds of years apparently in this telling, and that's where she's speaking, with this poem to us from. And again, the centuries now pass like days. Time is no longer bound by the fleshly desires and concerns, and the cultural concerns of the everyday. What am I going to eat today? What am I going to do? How am I going to fix this or that problem? What am I going to feed, Junior, whatever it is, right? But that is sort of a little, quick little tricky blanket she kind of pulls out from under your feet right there at the end. That as it turns out, the horse's head, or she's been dead for a long time, and that's where she's telling us this poem from. Okay, that is Because I Could Not Stop Her Death by Emily Dickinson, and we'll see you next time.